What's up, everybody? Tim Anderson here, aka Renfill. I have a Lucas taking up my whole chair today, if you want to take a look. So I'm reading at a really weird angle because I can't get leaned back in my chair. It is what it is. Welcome back to the latest episode of Mondays in Middle Earth. We're going to be going through the latest chapter of the Two Towers as we continue our read through to go along with what we've been learning about and with the Rings of Power, and also just to reacquaint myself with the story and the lore and learn things that I never knew before. Because a lot of the stuff, like on the internet these days, like Tolkien Gateway, didn't exist back when I was reading these books 20 years ago. So it's been really great to be able to have a resource tool like that at my disposal to read up on and understand further things about the books as we get through. So without further ado, I need to resituate my headphones. We're gonna go through. We're up to chapter 4 of the Two Towers of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit. Now, if you haven't watched the previous episodes, feel free to dive in. There's all up, there'll be a link somewhere up in here where you can go watch the previous episodes. There's also a section in our Discord channel dedicated to this book series. So if you want to go back and check that out, you can have discussions there as well as check back on previous episodes. There's also a playlist here on YouTube, so check that out. And if you like what you see here today, do me a solid. Click that button down below. This is super thanks. Give $2, $5, $10, whatever you can to the cause. Keeps this channel going. And thanks to all of these people here who have been contributing and who have joined as members here on YouTube, as well as over at our Patreon page. For everything we're building with the World of the Weave and the Void, your support is what keeps this channel going and shows like this being made as I continue my journey as a content creator. So thanks everybody for that. Links are down below if you need links to all the things. So the main focus on the early part of this chapter is to show us how basically the hobbits are kind of going from the Black Gate and moving down towards a part of the land that it says had only been a few years under the dominion of Sauron and had not yet fallen wholly into decay. Now we start seeing flashes of green and brown and life in the landscape around them, which is something that's very important from the perspective of Sam, because he's seen this life, this forest environment, and he's reminded that, hey, maybe there is still hope. Maybe it's not as dismal as we thought. Um, they still couldn't exactly forget the danger, but hey, at the very least, we can see what's around here. Eventually, they pass into the land that it says men once called Ithilien, a fair country of climbing woods and swift falling streams, and they noticed that the fragrance was on the air and that it grew as they went forward until finally they reached gentle slopes covered with resinous trees of fir and cedar and cypress and sweet smelling herbs and shrubs, and for the first time since Rivendell, the hobbits felt the change of climate. Um, it says here that this had been known as the Garden of Gondor before, and while now desolate was still kept, and this is the wording that Tolkien uses, it was still kept as a disheveled dryad loveliness. A very specific wording here in the way that he's choosing to describe this Garden of Gondor. It's noted here that Gollum coughs and retches as they walk. He can't stand the smells of the herbs and the trees and the flowers and everything. But the hobbits breathe deep, and it says that Sam laughed for heart's ease, not for jest. They scramble forward, forgetting about the danger around them, until Sam stumbles upon a ring still scorched by fire, and in the middle of it a pile of charred and broken bones and skulls, and he is reminded that they are not in a safe place. Dun, dun, dun. Lost my notes here. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, this is also the chapter where we get Sam's line of dialogue, which has been much discussed in recent years by people who would try to apply a homosexual tone to Tolkien's work. There's a scene here where, for the first time in many nights, the hobbits rest, or Frodo in particular takes a sleep, and for the first time in many, many months, rests, you know, um, completely at ease, and it says the lines of worry fade from his face, and he looks like he does. He looks like he used to in the Shire for the first time in many, 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 many months. And Sam is watching him, and there's this line of dialogue about how I love him. He's like that, and sometimes it shines through somehow, but I love him whether or no. And this is as he's watching Frodo sleep peacefully for the first time in many years, or many months, excuse me. And some have tried to claim that this is a sexual line of reference, but I just don't agree. I think this is nothing more than a true platonic friendship. It's kind of like the love you have for your brother or your cousin, someone you're very close with. I can think of friends that I had growing up with that I loved unconditionally like this. That was just how I was raised, in a church environment, and Tolkien was also raised in a church environment. And I find that way too many people need to sexualize everything in today's day and age that we live in, and I just don't see it here. And I don't agree with anyone who tries to claim that this is, by its default nature, sexual. However, um, if people want to interpret this in their own readings as a Frodo and Sam relationship, I think that that's absolutely fine. I just don't think it's fair to try to claim that that's the default um, interpretation of this, because I don't think it is. I think the default interpretation is nothing more than friendship. And Tolkien himself wrote in his letters that the relationship between Frodo and Sam was very much, master and servant. The I forget the terminology. I covered it in a video, but it's been 6, 8 months ago now. The relationship between the soldier and his servant, the officer and his servant in the war, which was very much, the master and his butler, so to speak. And there was love there between those two, but not sexual love. It was platonic love. It was the admiration for the better, um, the superior, so to speak, the person who was higher up in the food chain because of rank, not because of blood. Um, I think that that's what's going on here because that's what Tolkien wrote in his letters. Now, other people have chosen to interpret it differently. And if you want to interpret it differently, again, welcome to it, but let's not try to claim that that's the default because it's not. Tolkien himself didn't have that as the default. This is also when we get this cooking scene that's so famous from the movies when Smeagol brings back a brace of conies and there's the potatoes and potatoes and all this other stuff. Spiegel's primary concern here, though, in the book is the smoke from the fire. And Sam's like, oh, don't worry about it, And as they go through this whole scene of him trying to convince Smeagol to help him hunt down, herbs and stuff, Smeagol's like, no, I don't like smelly leaves, and you're going to ruin the the rabbits by cooking them, so I don't want to help you. And eventually, they eat, and Sam, of course, admonishes him for building the fire, but it's already been done. Sam goes off and he's like washing dishes and all this other stuff, and turns back around and he's looking up and he sees the smoke rising. And he goes, "Oh crap! Smeagol was right. That smoke, I need to put that out quick." And he goes back up, and this is when, too late, 4 men arrive because they've seen the smoke and they step out, and we meet Faramir, Captain of Gondor, um, the most badass character in the entire series of books. You cannot convince me otherwise. As cool as Aragorn is, Faramir, I think, is way more of a badass because he's of the similar bloodline, but this guy eats, sleeps, and shits on the front step of Mordor on a daily basis and defends Gondor on a daily basis from the threat of orcs and worse, and does not waver in his defense of Minas Tirith and Gondor. Faramir is the epitome of what a truly noble man in these times was. And when they meet him, Frodo's giving an account of who they are and where they came from. He's mentioning Rivendell, and it says Faramir starts and grows intense when they mentioned Rivendell and the companions. And when the name of Boromir is mentioned, all 4 of the men have a visible reaction and cry out, Boromir. Um, when Frodo talks about the riddle that brought Boromir to Rivendell, Faramir asks, well, what about Isildur's Bane? And Frodo says that's hidden, although it doubtless may be clear in time. So we get a sense that Faramir obviously knows something, and spoiler alert, we find out that of course Faramir is Boromir's brother, and so all of these things are making sense to him. But for a first-time reader, this is one of those things where you might not know yet if you've never watched the films or you've never read the books. So unfortunately, I've spoiled that for you. But hey, I think most people watching this have already read these books. Um, um, but what's very interesting, and it's what's different from the film, is Faramir does not take them captive. Excuse me, does not take them captive. He leaves a couple of his guys on guard and says, I've got to go track down these bad guys who are in the land. I'll leave my 2 guys to guard with you. We'll talk more when I get back. Um, and for the rest of the afternoon, basically, and for quite a while, we get these 2 soldiers that he left behind having this long conversation about the men of Herod and the South and Southerners, the Southrons, as they're called, who are coming up and joining Mordor. And Frodo listens intently to all of this, and they eventually end up having a nap. And when they wake up, there's a sound of battle going on. And there's this huge battle men, between Faramir's men and these other men, these men of stone. And Sam is traumatized here, and we get a line of dialogue that's very famous from the movie, but it's Faramir who speaks the line in the movie, and I think that's one of the things I really appreciated about in the film. I thought they did a very good job, even though I didn't agree with the way they portrayed Faramir for something that we're going to talk about later in another chapter. One of the things I did really appreciate about Faramir is when he gives the line of dialogue, they're looking down at the dead man. And here it's Sam who says, and he says he wonders what the man's name was, where he came from, and if he was really evil or heart, or what lies or threats had led him on the long march from his home, and if he would not have really rather have stayed there in peace. I think this is a brilliant take on war in general, and I think it shows Tolkien's own personal experiences on the battlefield, fighting in world wars. Um, kind of looking at his acknowledgement, at least, that all war is based on lies or threats because men deep in their hearts really just are only ever seeking peace. But we go to war because we're lied to or we're threatened or things happen, and as a result, we go off to defend our land or to help another country defend their land. And it's just, I think it's a very poignant take on the fact that this man wasn't necessarily evil. We were just calling him the enemy. But was he really the enemy? Was he truly evil of heart? Or was he just convinced through lies or threat that he needed to take this long march from home? Because wouldn't he much rather have been back home with his wife and kids and farming his ground and living his life in peace? Good stuff here. We, of course, end the chapter with the Oliphant and the soldiers that Faramir left behind laughing that when Faramir returns, they're going to have to leave quickly because Faramir basically just kicked the bee's nest and stirred up a bunch of hornets, and all of Mordor is going to be looking for him when he returns. And Sam is like, well, we'll, be on our way then. And the guy's like, well, Faramir will probably want you to come with us when he gets back to keep you safe. And that's kind of where the chapter ends off. So it kind of also is where I think where, from the film's perspective, this is where they took an interpretation of um, the former Faramir taking them with him to the hidden refuge, not because he was forcing them to be prisoners, because here in the book it's mostly because of, hey, you guys are gonna die out here if you're left behind, because they're all these guys, the men and the orcs, and they're gonna be coming hot looking for who just did this. For your safety, you need to come with us, as opposed to the way it's portrayed in the film, where it's very much, no, we're taking you with us because we need to question you about the One Ring and Boromir and all this other stuff. So, very interesting to see where the next chapter takes us. I kind of know where the next chapter is heading because I vaguely remember this part, even though it's been a long time. Um, Love to hear your thoughts below. Don't forget, like, subscribe, hit the bell icons to get more like this. Every Monday at 11 a.m., we do Mondays in Middle Earth, sometimes with Lucas and sometimes not. Don't forget to join our Discord, support the channel with a super thanks. Head on over to the Patreon page if you would as well. And I'll see everybody in the next episode. Happy reading. Till then.